Thanks very much, Victor, for the introduction. And good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone else online. Thank you so much for coming along to my talk. Today, I'm going to discuss some of the kind of emerging ideas I've had more recently in regards to generative AI and teacher professional learning. As Victor said, I gave a similar talk on Tuesday, but today's session, I'll focus a little bit more on digital multimodal composing, DMC, similar to closer to the interests of those attending today. Okay, so here's an overview of today's talk. I will try to adopt a socio-material lens on understanding GenAI in teacher professional learning. I'll start today's presentation with a review of the current research context in this field by talking you through, as I'm sure you've all experienced, the rapid GenAI adoption in higher education institutions and also initial teacher education institutions, and how that compare to the policy support that we as educators are receiving, and to really critique the role of GenAI as a tool by looking at two very highly used models in research, the technology acceptance model and also the diffusion of innovation model. And then I'll try to argue that we should broaden our understanding or view on GenAI from just a static digital tool to something that's more disruptive and more transformative, and how can we link that to teacher professional learning. I'll go a little bit philosophical by talking about the distinction between human and non-human, human and GenAI features. And after that, I'm going to outline three pillars of my conceptualization of a relational approach to thinking about teacher AI literacy by talking you through learning as iterative attunement, a dialogic learning space, creating that space for teacher professional learning, and also the idea of distributed agency in human AI partnership. I will also explain some principles for teacher professional learning and draw ideas from the data in a smaller kind of pilot project I'm doing with my teaching cohort, looking at the teaching of DMC from a course I lead. So I'll start with a wider context. So if you really think wider in terms of teacher professional learning, initial teacher education, we really sit within this higher education policy context. I'm using large-scale surveys to demonstrate the point that GenAI has now been embedded in the learning, teaching, and assessment in higher education institutions around the world. As you can see, that a recent survey by the Higher Education Policy Institute, HEPI, done in early 2025, has shown that 92% of UK higher education students are using GenAI, and this is a dramatic increase from only 66% last year in 2024. A similar trend is in Australia, where Zhang did a survey with over 8,000 students, and they found that 83% students were using GenAI in their everyday practice. And interestingly, nearly half of them are using it on a weekly basis or even daily basis. So the use is really pervasive. In sharp contrast, if you look at the recent study by EDUCAUSE AI Landscape Study by 2025, they found that only 39% of US institutions have a AI policy, okay? And in comparison to 2023, this was 2 years ago, it was 23%. So from 23% to 39%, the rate of the growth is much, much slower than what we've seen in terms of how students are using GenAI in their everyday practice. Another sort of interesting finding, kind of trends I've noticed since reading this Titan Partners report, Time for Class 2025, Empowering Educators, Engaging Students. So they did a survey with 304 institutions, what they found is that currently 4% of institutions are measuring students' use of GenAI against learning outcomes. So that's 4%. Okay, even though we've introduced the idea of GenAI into the public 3 years ago, but in 3 years' time, 39% of US institutions are thinking about measuring GenAI literacy against learning outcomes. So this is going to be a huge change in terms of the policy. And we can discuss the implications for educators and for our students later on as well. And for those of you who are familiar with digital technology in education literature, you may have read or heard about these two dominant models that researchers tend to use to measure how people adopt a certain technology. So adopting the use of iPad, adopting the use of mobile-assisted language learning, all the other what we call traditional digital tools. One is called the technology acceptance model. So it's looking at perceived usefulness and perceived ease of use. So how easy it is for users, for students, for teachers to use this technology for whatever purpose they're looking at. And they're linking that to behavior intentions, whether they intend to adopt that technology in their working life. The other model is looking at the spread, the diffusion of innovations. So we have the early adopters, we have the early majority, actually, we have the late majority. So these are distribution of the spread of the adoption of a particular technology. Okay, both models, and I would argue, are still viewing GenAI almost as another digital tool that you adopt. So you learn to use iPad, you learn to use an app on a phone. There's been lots of research on GenAI in teacher professional learning as well. Indeed, researchers have found that the majority of research in GenAI in language education seems to be primarily focusing on on students, and a relatively smaller proportion are focusing on teacher professional learning. And I've listed some of the areas in terms of teacher professional learning that researchers have investigated. These include teacher collaborative reflective practice, teacher emotional experiences, adaptive expertise, teachers as a GenAI as moderator of a more effective, formative, and personalized feedback, and some of the other assignments, research designs. Okay, so it really asks us to think about the nature of GenAI. Is it just another static digital tool, or is it something that's transformative, or is something that's different? Okay, so when we think about traditional AI tools, these are things like a spam filter where the algorithm can be predefined to perform a particular type of task, or they use supervised learning algorithms to train the data in such a way that it follows a particular pattern. The outcomes tend to be predictable and consistent. Whereas for GenAI, as we all know, it leverages deep learning models, and it generates very often entirely novel content. In fact, each time you enter an input, it's very likely that you're going to have a completely different output. GenAI is able to perform unique tasks without explicit programming as well. So that's why it's so user-friendly, in the sense that we as everyday users, we don't have to learn to program in order to use GenAI. Outputs can be predefined, are often unexpected, cannot be predefined and are often unexpected, meaning that, again, GenAI can surprise you at times. So there are 4 key characteristics in terms of GenAI or AI technologies. The first one is the idea of protein, which is thinking about the ability of GenAI to simulate text, images, and sound. The second one is opaque. So thinking about the hidden algorithms that, or the hidden biases that we can't really tell from the outside. The unstable is also something that's quite important to note, especially for GenAI, because it's not based on information retrieval, meaning that there is a knowledge base like a dictionary, and then you just enter and it will give you the answer. And similar technology is corpus linguistics, where you can have a database, and then the user would do the search, and you get this same consistent output each time you enter the same prompt. But for GenAI, that's not the case. It's primarily based on probability, so statistical models, and it can actually be very, very unstable. The last function is, again, quite relevant in the discussion of GenAI, is to think about the social element, the social side of GenAI, especially the chatbots such as ChatGPT, where it can actually perform interaction with humans, almost like you're on a social media interacting with your friends. So on the last slide, if you remember, there's this one feature that I mentioned is the unstable feature. Okay, one of the critiques for GenAI so far has been hallucination, and this recent paper published by OpenAI in August 2025 really shows that as the technology itself develops, the rate of hallucination will drop. So as you can see, in comparison to GPT-4o, the hallucination rate was 12.9, and then the GPT-5, the reported hallucination rate is 9.6. So it's already below 10%. So we can only see that dropping over time. So that's another key question for us to really think about. As the hallucination drop, let's say below 5% or below 1%, is there something else we need to think about rather than keep chasing about hallucination, thinking about policing students' work and penalizing the use of GenAI? So I'm going to kind of return the question of what it means to be a human. I know it's really philosophical, but I think it's important to discuss a couple of things or a couple of ideas to really present the reality of where we are. The technology itself is evolving so quickly. So far, in 2025, August 2025, we know that AI has a vast knowledge quantity base. Okay, we already know that AI knows more than any one human being. The knowledge base is the entire internet. No one here in this room or on the internet has a knowledge base of the entire internet. And GenAI is really forming certain technical domains. So I'm sure you've seen news and reports about AI helping researchers discovering new protein structures and all that. So if it's tailored to a particular field or a particular knowledge domain, it can actually outperform human beings. Rapid information processing, we've all experienced that. When you ask ChatGPT or you ask your favorite GenAI platform for certain information, it can usually produce the answer or the information to you very, very quickly within seconds or milliseconds. Pattern recognition across multiple data sets. So now there's multiple actually consumer-based GenAI that allows users to upload or to input a knowledge base without any programming skills. And the AI output can be based on the synthesis of the knowledge. Again, this far exceeds human capabilities. Yeah. Human strengths. So we do still have certain strengths. Don't want to be too pessimistic, but it is important to note that these strengths that I'm listing here, deep interpersonal understanding, value-based judgment, culture-specific expertise, nuanced, critical, creative thinking, these human strengths are diminishing as the AI keep breaking all different types of tests and benchmarks. So we need to be quite aware of the changes, the dynamics. So the main point I'm trying to argue here is about blurring the lines. Okay, so if you think about what we're able to achieve, let's say five years ago, text-to-speech or text-to-image or text-to-video was very, very limited. But now in August 2025, the lines are blurring, and it's going to get more and more blurry, unfortunately. And so Jory argues that GenAI not only mediates learning, but it augments socio-material assemblages by shifting the center of representation and agency from human-only to material elements. So increasingly, what I'm trying to argue today as well, that we should pay more attention to the material elements in the education space. AI systems can now act autonomously, making decisions or initiating actions independently without explicit programming, rather than simply executing tasks as programmed by humans. And what is also interesting here is this OECD paper, which I do encourage you to check it out if you haven't read it. It's looking at AI co-agency. It's saying that while key distinctions between human agency and AI agents can still be outlined today, the increasing capabilities of AI systems may soon blur the lines between some aspects of humans and artificial intelligence. And this has implications for teacher agency, how it's interpreted and exercised in the digital environments. So this is something new to me as well, so please bear with me. This is a new tool published by Microsoft as well. So some of you may know it's called Vibe Voice. It's a text-to-speech open source model, which allows users to generate speech through text. What is so exciting to me, certainly, about this new model is that it allows us to generate a variety of text-to-speech outputs. So the first category, as you can see from the screen, is called context-aware expression. Okay, I think this is especially relevant to the DMC audience, actually. So the first one, I just want to give you a demo. I'll just play a few seconds. It's called spontaneous emotion. So I really want you to pay attention to the emotions in the speech generated by AI in this case.
I can't believe you did it again. I waited for 2 hours. 2 hours! Not a single call, not a text. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was, just sitting there alone?
Okay, I don't know if you can hear. Yeah, you can hear. Good. It's just the sheer emotion that this AI generated speech is able to convey. And I'll skip the spontaneous singing for you. Spare you the pain. Oh yeah. Podcast with background music. Just to give you an
Welcome
idea.
to Tech Forward, the show that unpacks the biggest stories in technology. I'm your host, Alice, and today we are diving into one of the most anticipated and, frankly, most chaotic tech launches of the year, OpenAI's GPT.
Again, it's very natural. I don't know if you can hear the music in the background, but it is something that's quite impossible to achieve, I would say, let's say 3 or 5 years back, especially if you think about language teaching and the traditional English language textbooks tend to have background noise in the traffic and all that. And think about what we're able to achieve now to generate something that's not authentic per se, i.e. not recording real people saying, but you can actually add the background to kind of train your learners' skills of distinguishing the different sounds with a very chaotic background, for example. This one's the cross-lingual speech.
Hello and welcome to the Vibe Voice podcast channel. Today we're going to teach you some very basic but useful expressions in English.
嗨，大家好，我是 Thomas。今天我将和大家分享一些非常有趣又地道的英语用法。
So this, again, is another thing that's quite exciting to me because very often we think about a GenAI creating a voice. Usually, there's inconsistencies throughout, right? But in this case, they are mixing the two languages, and it's really, really much more advanced than I would ever imagined. The last one I want to show you, again, this is in this demo, is this long conversational speech. This particular open source model allows you to generate up to 60 to 90 minutes of conversation. In this case, as you can see, I'm not going to play actually, you can just see the transcript here. You can have a conversation of 4 people talking together. So it's not just a monologue or a dialogue, it's 4 people having a proper conversation, one building on each other. This is the state of art technology, and this is where we are in August 2025. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen, in the future, in the next 2 to 3 years. So the key question here, you might wonder, I did wonder about this. Can AI ever replace teachers? Is there going to be a day where learners no longer need teachers? What research says so far is that human teachers remain essential. Okay, and what they found is that students, even for students who use AI extensively, so those who use it daily or weekly, they still prefer the human interaction and human contact in learning. And students particularly like or prefer the social, emotional, and human connections in learning. And they also need this ethical guidance from human teachers. And they also regard teachers as more trustworthy providers of feedback than GenAI. So that's what research finds so far. So far, AI cannot replace teachers. That's a short answer. Another quite substantial survey, again, is from Titan Partners. They did a survey with over 1,000 students and university instructors, asking them whether they think whether they prefer face-to-face teaching or do they prefer hybrid or online teaching. This result is quite surprising to me, because if you look at the first graph, the first small one is prefer face-to-face. You can see
I stand beside you. Two
from
of you
2023
and the other gentleman also.
can you mute one of the audience?
You still decide whether to go up, not to go up.
From 2023 to
I think you decide whether to go up
2025,
this bus or that
there's
bus.
actually a growing
Your gentleman friend.
of students
The gentleman friend?
face-to-face teaching.
You're talking to the gentleman friend.
The same
for
students. Students also prefer face-to-face.
Never say hello to me.
2025.
You tell Leiden, Dr. Wilson, you never say hello to
you
me.
probably think, oh, AI technology is so advanced now. We have so many different tools.
You're the tutorial group.
And it's probably, students now prefer studying online or hybrid, but actually that's not the case. They still prefer, or increasingly prefer, face-to-face teaching with instructors. So what I'm trying to argue in this particular presentation or talk is a broader conceptualization of our thinking about our engagement with GenAI systems, okay? So I'm just going to quickly recap my argument so far, is that we need to think beyond the traditional adoption model, because GenAI is a disruptive and transformative technology. So thinking about teacher development, teacher learning programs, it's not just about teaching them how to use ChatGPT, teaching them about prompt engineering. We need to go beyond that. GenAI is blurring the lines between what it means to be human and what GenAI or what the technology is capable of. And the line is only going to get blurred over time. I also talked briefly about implications for teachers and teacher professional learning. So in the following slides, I'm going to adopt a broader conceptualization of GenAI and teacher professional learning by grounding my discussion in the disruptive nature of GenAI and the role it plays in the socio-material dynamics of teacher education, and attempt to kind of outline how pre-service teachers can learn to navigate this emergent field. I'll try to talk you through very briefly 3 core pillars of arguments. The first one is looking at the iterative attunement in our engagement with GenAI. Second one is thinking about dialogic space, what this means when we introduce GenAI to the curriculum. And the third one is thinking about distributed agency in human-AI relationship. Before we do that, because we are adopting a socio-material perspective, we need to try to map out what are the actors in the assemblage we're talking about, okay? And it's important to also point out from the outset that the assemblage of actors is entangled, okay? They are, even though I'm listing them as individual actors, both human and non-human actors, they are actually linked. So if you think about pre-service, the assemblage of pre-service teacher education, within that space, we have the pre-service teachers, of course. We also have university educators, or often called tutors as well. We have the school mentors. When they go to placements, there's usually a school mentor, the class teacher. And there's also the school pupils that the pupils that they interact and design lessons for. But thinking about the wider context, there's also the school leaders, the departmental head, and the principals and all the other senior officers, the policymakers. So usually, because teacher education is such a highly regulated profession, there is also policy dimension into what pre-service teachers can do and should do. So these are the human actors. The non-human actors, on the other hand, are GenAI systems, of course. And so these could be ChatGPT or Claude or all the other GenAI systems or tools. Even though it's in the role of pre-service teacher, but we all know that it permeates into teacher, educator, school member. So this is just an illustration. Other non-human actors include the learning management system, the educational literature that they're engaging with, and even other digital resources that might not be AI powered, right? The reporting templates for the school mentors to complete, and that's going to have an impact on how the pre-service teacher perform in the following placement, right? The mobile devices that they use, sometimes if they use mobile learning, standards for provisional registration, that's what we call in Scotland, is the policy, the standard for student teachers to meet in order to be registered, and departmental cultures and structures. So even thinking about the non-human actors on the right, they all have an influence on the human actors and vice versa. So as Fenwick argued that learning, development, and change emerge as a unity of individual and social or societal activity, the symbolic and material, and the present and future, the past, all interacting iteratively over time. So I'm trying to unpack that sentence now. The first pillar I want to draw your attention to is this idea of learning as iterative attunements. Okay, so we can think about it through three lenses. The first one is learning. What does it mean by learning? The argument, again, I'm trying to put forward is to reject thinking about learning as individual skill acquisition, i.e. when we think about professional learning programs for student teachers with GenAI, it's not about learning how to use a particular tool or particular technology, but rather thinking about learning as participation in socio-material assemblages where materials actively influence outcomes. So thinking about the table I kind of draw your attention to earlier, how do the different elements of that shape how students engage with GenAI? So the policy might say don't use GenAI, but students might still use GenAI. So what does that mean? How can we make sure that students are using GenAI responsibly and ethically? Practice is the other lens, which is thinking about practice as iterative reconfiguration through disruptions, constant adjustments, and attunements. So teaching practice, which is one of the key area of initial teacher education, no longer becomes something that students can just sit there passively and learn what was taught or what they observed, but indeed is about disrupting the existing norms and reconfiguring the human and non-human actors in practice. Space is something that's fluid. which there might be gaps. So there will be things that the student teacher or the pre-service teachers might not know, or things that even the university educators might not know. And indeed, the future of GenAI, none of us know, right? So we have to be open to new thinking and new ideas coming in, and then constantly interrogate that and think about how we could then think about more innovative ways of engaging with new technologies and new features of the AI systems. So what socio-materialism lens is arguing is that human and material elements, like GenAI, are infused and co-constitutive, shaping one another through reciprocal and emerging interactions. Again, just to kind of give you an idea of how that is happening already in practice, is by looking at this, again, survey results from Titan Partners, is that what they found is now everybody's using GenAI, right? Instructors using GenAI. The university is, formulating policies for teachers to use GenAI. But a lot of people are arguing, yes, GenAI will make our life so much easier. It's going to reduce our workload. It's going to transform, our space at work. But actually, if you compare the data from 2024 and 2025, we see that teachers actually felt that their working lives have been made more difficult by GenAI. So 38% now, teachers now see their workload increase because of GenAI. And what they tend to focus on are monitoring for cheating, right? So that's kind of linked to one of the features of GenAI, is the unstable feature, the hallucination. And teachers also spend a lot more time redesigning assessment to counter AI usage. They also spend time learning about AI tools because there's new things coming out every day. So actually, GenAI has not made teachers' life easier, it seems, from this report. The second pillar I want to discuss is the dialogic, creating this dialogic space for teacher professional learning. And the most straightforward illustration would be thinking about your interaction with ChatGPT or interaction with GenAI tools. So ChatGPT, for example, has made our interaction with this technology so easy. And a lot of our discussion has been about prompt engineering. Yeah. So prompt engineering, to me, it's still coming from humans, and then you are telling AI what to do and how to think. But rather to think about the more dialogic space where you and GenAI have a more reciprocal and co-constructed relationship, and co-constructing and negotiating meanings. So that's why we say to students, you can use GenAI to prompt GenAI to give you some sort of answer, but don't accept it as face value. There's several layers of prompt engineering, and it's a negotiation process in essence. So we need to encourage our students to move beyond expecting an answer from GenAI, in a more straightforward way, but thinking about how they would argue with GenAI, how they would negotiate with GenAI. So that's why this dialogic space is so important. And for teacher professional learning, there's already research that has looked at professional dialogue and teacher learning. Okay, Zhang and Fisher explored in-service teachers' beliefs about vocabulary learning and argued that adopting multiple lenses to enhance teacher beliefs and the importance of reflexivity and the influence of context on teacher dialogic reflection. I had similar findings in the two studies I did. One is with pre-service student teachers in Scotland, looking at their dialogue, professional dialogue with university mentors, with university tutors, with school mentors, and how that is contributing to their professional learning. And another study looking at in-service teachers in the UK with my colleague Sophia Lam, looking at how in-service teachers of Mandarin in the UK, how do they have developed their professional knowledge and understanding through professional dialogue. The studies were done before GenAI, so it was not really GenAI focused, but it does find that this dialogic notion is really important for professional learning. So it's something that I quite like to explore when we think about our interaction or dialogue with GenAI. Hetherington and Wegerif has published this idea of material dialogic approach to pedagogy in teacher education. They argue the need to explicitly consider the relationship between material resources and dialogic learning. So again, this is using the socio-material lens and looking at how to encourage teachers to form these diverse perspectives that's beyond the immediate dialogic context. And this idea of super addressee, which some of you may be familiar with, is from dialogism from Bakhtin, is the idealized third voice. And I think GenAI has offered us with this particular perspective is even more important when we think about the idea of dialogue and how GenAI can be, for example, a mediator of the super addressee, where they help teachers understand the contextual complexities of teaching and predict the application of pedagogical decisions. Because GenAI is based on predictability, right? So in a way, it can be used as a training ground for student teachers who are less experienced and thinking through what might happen if they do this. Dialogic professional learning simulating the third voice. So for example, GenAI can serve as a mentor to offer feedback in professional dialogue. GenAI can also help pre-service teachers with adaptive pedagogy, for example, by assuming certain stakeholder roles, such as a pupil or a parent or a tutor. So the concept of super addressee, I think, is a really interesting idea to explore as a form of mediation, and it signals the openness to the plurality of voices and that transcends meaning beyond immediate context, and allowing teachers to think about how they engage with GenAI for the professional learning of the future. The third pillar I want to elaborate on today is distributed agency. So the socio-material lens sees agency across objects, spaces, and technologies. So it's not something that's unique to human. Teacher agency then is distributed, emerging through ongoing interplay of human and non-human actors, and that would include GenAI. And what I'm arguing in particular is for us to recognize the complex ways in which agency is distributed across human and non-human. And this particular point of view posits that a simple implementation by compliance can sometimes compromise the notion of agency through, for example, increased workload. So the diagram I showed you earlier is really interesting in the sense that we might think GenAI is all for productivity. So surely our teacher workload should, go down, but actually it's increased. The same for policy. Universities might say, everybody is allowed to use GenAI. Now you should all use GenAI. It's going to make your life a lot easier. But actually they are creating new demands and responsibilities for university lecturers. So in a way, it's restraining agency, human agency or teacher agency, rather than opening up more space for teachers. So there's a need to support teacher agency within complex distributed systems through coordinated efforts. Things like policy, for example, policy implementation and design really need to think about not just the policy itself, but how it relates to practice, pedagogy, curriculum, etc., etc. So this kind of joint up thinking is even more important in the age of GenAI. This recent study by Kim and colleagues conducted interviews with 20 Chinese higher education students about their use of GenAI for academic writing. They found that students actually view GenAI as multiple roles, including multitasking writing assistant, private virtual tutors, and the digital peer. So this agency, if you extend that idea of agency even forward, then we need to think about the human-AI partnership, right? If you see GenAI or other material elements as almost equal to you, then you need to form some sort of partnership with them rather than you just using GenAI tools itself. This diagram is also from the OECD paper from 2025. It's thinking about diverse co-agency relationships between teacher and students in the 21st century classrooms. As you can see from the diagram that the paper is arguing that within the teacher-student relationship, there's also the AI tutor, AI assistant, AI avatar, and of course the student peers. Everything is kind of connected in this network, which is fundamentally linked to the socio-material lens on learning and development. So temporally, if you think about the development, that partnership, it tends to go through a few stages. And the first one is playing around. I think we've all kind of had that experience when ChatGPT first came out. We were trying out what it can do, what it can not do. And then if we like it, you're in love with the tool, right? You love it, you use it so much, but some people might not. So this is just kind of one possibility, of course. If you use it so much, you love it, then you started, you're committed to using it, right? But then there's also a point where you feel frustrated. Maybe there's something that you thought GenAI could help you solve, but actually it couldn't solve. And then in the end, you have some sort of enlightenment stage, or you readjust the way you engage with GenAI. So what this diagram is showing is that our partnership with GenAI is an ongoing process of negotiation and adaptation. It typically you don't form a partnership with just one interaction with the tool. So what I'm trying to argue here is the evolving human-AI partnerships. So typically, for general purpose GenAI chatbots, the goal is typically to provide users with information requested, okay? But more recent developments in the technology world, so for example, the recent personalities of the study mode of ChatGPT adopts a Socratic method that gradually builds a learning partnership with human through iterative, cumulative, and dialogic interaction. So when you turn on the study mode on ChatGPT now, it won't give you the answer straight away. Instead, it's going to keep asking you questions and gradually build your capacity to learn rather than giving you the answer. So the challenge for us now as educators is that will our students get used to or learn to have a productive conversation with this type of interaction with GenAI, okay? And if not, will they ever get used to this particular way of interaction with GenAI? Another example is the Google Notebook LM. I'm sure some of you have used it before. It's a useful platform that you can upload source materials up to 50, actually, PDFs, links, etc. And it's going to have an interaction with you based on the source materials that you've uploaded. Another useful function of that Notebook LM is the podcast function, where it's able to generate an audio overview for users. And some of the recent features on that is that now you can focus on a specific source. You can say to the technology, try to focus on your audio overview on the following sources, okay? Or try to build a podcast audio overview on a particular topic, or try to target a specific audience in the overview. So it's getting more and more personalized. And also, interestingly, you as a reader, you as a listener, you can interrupt the podcast in the middle and ask a specific question. And that's something that we can only do in a traditional radio. Even with a podcast that we see, that we listen to on Spotify, we can't ask a question in the middle of the podcast. It's not interactive. But Notebook LM is able to achieve that. So what are the implications for teachers? Another quick tool that I want to mention, which I believe just came out on Tuesday this week, is this Google Translate app. It's not really an app, it's a function within Google Translate, which allows users to automatically create lessons for learning different languages. And I think it's going to have a significant impact on Duolingo. This particular Google Translate function also allows you to have real-time conversation and listening practice. It will give you a score as well. It will also generate a vocab list for you to review. It's quite powerful, I think. I'm still kind of just playing around with it with French, I think, the other day, and it gave me a 4-star instead of 5 for my French. Damn, I'm gonna have to improve my French now. But it is quite interesting to see how GenAI is now allowing people to have this kind of language learning activities. For Duolingo, some of you may know, the Max version of Duolingo is a paid version. So if you don't pay, there's a free version, of course, but if you don't pay the Max version, you can't have audio conversation with the Duolingo chatbots. But Google just opened that up to everyone, so everyone can use this function now. So let's see what's going to happen to Duolingo. We have to talk about GenAI without not mentioning the risk and concerns of GenAI over reliance. And more recently, there's been lots of reports and studies, including the MIT brain science researchers study, which I've listed on this screen, talking about the danger of relying on GenAI too much. But I think it's important to read these reports and studies with a critical eye. So they were saying, for example, the DFE report is saying that almost everybody, students, parents, pupils, they're all concerned about using GenAI and how that's going to impact on students' criticality and judgments, etc. Fan and colleagues' 2025 study is looking at how overusing GenAI can create what they call metacognitive laziness, which decreases self-regulation. And the third one, the Kosmina one and colleagues study, is the MIT study I was talking about. It was not peer-reviewed, and the authors did give an interview saying that they wanted the findings out as soon as possible without waiting for the peer review kind of process. I think academic colleagues in this chat will understand, but still it's important to view the findings from this study with some criticality there, because, for example, my first reading of the report or the paper was that what they call AI-supported writing, the interaction between the students and the AI, I don't think is particularly an effective way. And I think they just ask the students to use AI to create a writing without properly train them or support them to use it more effectively. And they then found that there is cognitive debt. So I think it's interesting to read, but you have to form your own sort of takeaway from that. But another kind of idea that while I was thinking about the risks and concerns of GenAI or reliance is that perhaps we should also be thinking about working without AI. There are certain skills and capabilities we want our students to develop that can only be developed without using AI. So I think making this distinction is really important for teachers and will have implications on the design of the curriculum. So I'm going to outline a few principles for teacher professional learning. As you can see from the screen, they are not nothing kind of completely unpredictable, but I do want to go back to the basics in this case. First one is in relation to the problem-solving skills. How do you become a better problem solver in the age of GenAI? GenAI can give you lots of answers, can have you solve lots of problems, but it's about how you approach the tasks, right? So starting with the inquiry stance, building constructive dialogue with GenAI systems, and also indeed with other humans, such as a peer dialogue. Collaborative problem solving is about thinking regarding AI as a partner, and how do you collaborate with GenAI instead of just relying on GenAI to do all the work for you. And then the fourth one, which I think is crucial for all teacher professional learning, is this idea of reflective practice. The second principle is about adopting a critical stance. Again, this is not something completely new, but as we use more and more GenAI in our everyday practice for work or for life, we do have to learn to work with opacity. Okay, so we won't know, and we probably will never know the inner workings of certain GenAI models. But how do we work with the unknown? How do we work with the uncertainty? And the idea of disrupting and questioning established norms is also part of the critical stance. Repositioning AI as a partner, which is linked to the agency idea, distributed agency I was talking about earlier. And then within criticality or critical stance, also think about the wider macro level implications, such as policy, other human actors, curriculum, as well as practice. The last thing, the last principle is making evaluative judgments. So thinking about making informed decisions about AI tools, systems, processes, and outputs. Okay, so don't just focus on the output. You really have to think about whether the process itself is robust and the tools and usability of the tools. Evaluating the quality and appropriateness of AI in learning, teaching, assessment over time. And finally, ethical considerations. So really having robust debates and discussions with each other about whether that particular practice is ethical and responsible. I want to use the last 5 minutes to quickly share with you a kind of a small, very small pilot teaching project that I've been doing. So I teach a module back in Strathclyde. It's called Digital Technologies in Language Teaching. And that module has been around for the last 7 years. So it was before GenAI, introduction to the public. So the idea of the module is to give students broader knowledge about digital technologies in language teaching. So I would talk to them about things like blended learning, online learning, the TPAC model, the TAM model, in terms of the assessment, is two components. I'm still thinking this through, so please bear with me. It's not really, it's not perfect though, but I'm thinking about how I might adapt my assessment in such a way that is AI proof, if there's ever a thing that exists. But part of the assessment, 50%, is the DST artifact creation. Just going to talk you through some of the things I've been doing in relation to the GenAI. So this particular component of the assessment has been around since the beginning, okay? And I haven't actually changed this. So just kind of out of the interest of you guys in DMC as well, so the digital storytelling component would be broken down to different stages. And students will work on the pre-design stage first. I will introduce the concept of DST in week 3, and they will start working in pairs and gradually build up their DST elements. The design stage where they would draft scripts, storyboard, etc. And then the final submission stage, each student will actually submit their own DST product. So that's the task. And then we have GenAI. So I have to admit, I don't have a week that I'm dedicated to GenAI in this module. A, because changing it is such a pain within the university system, and I haven't got around it. And B is, anyway. So what I did was I embedded small elements of GenAI to gradually build students' capacity on using GenAI for the DST projects. I'm just going to share some slides, some of the slides that I use. So introducing students to GenAI in the sense that it's not just about ChatGPT. There are so many other tools that they can use, okay? And I also started this debate among students. What are the more acceptable use of GenAI? So as you can see, starting with research tools, exploring concepts too, and just paste a question in and then see what GenAI produces and then use that as your work. Is that acceptable, or is it more acceptable? Is it less acceptable? So it's about having the dialogue and having the debate that I think is really important. I then introduced them to image generation. Again, this is kind of one of the tasks that I would do in the sessions. I typically do have to give students some guidance, because some students, I have to say, so the last time I taught this module was February 2025. Some students still haven't used GenAI. So I do have to give them some guidance initially, especially for image generation. Typically, I think for text generation is quite common now, but for image generation, it's still, I think last time I did a hands up, yeah, I think over half of my class have never used GenAI to generate an image before. But as you can see, I did put in the instruction that you have to refine your prompts over 4 to 5 iterations, just to get them to think about how to have a dialogue with GenAI. Oh. Yeah, so I think this is from another session. Again, I'm trying to kind of drip feed little by little, in terms of our how they work with GenAI. So this idea of working with a black box, which I talked about today, is that I would remind students to not just use GenAI, but also write down their thoughts and feelings when using GenAI, and then reflect on GenAI's performance, not just focusing on the output, but also form some sort of critical stance towards the whole process, and think about how they might use that for language teaching and share the experience with others. And then I talked them through the basic of prompting. And for example, in this case, I just gave an example of the goal, the context, additional information, and etc., to get them to play around with the tool. For those who are more advanced, I would get them to work with the chatbots on creating short stories for a specific context. In this case, as you can see, it's the EAL beginners in a Scottish primary school, and see whether the chatbot was able to recognize the socio-economic, the context within that as well. I typically, I would say 90% of these tasks, I typically would get them to then reflect on their experience. So how did you get on with the AI platform? How do you feel about using AI? And how did the platform perform? And how would you apply that in teaching? Because they are pre-service teachers. Yeah, so I have a few more screenshots on prompts, but I just want to share with you the assessment rubric as well. I haven't changed it since the beginning. I probably should, but if any of you have any kind of suggestions, please do. Happy to discuss this. But I still think there's value in this particular assessment rubric, because I was trying to assess, so they have to create a video, right? A video at the ST artifact. And then what I'm assessing is the purpose of the story, the point of view, the dramatic question, choice of the contents, pacing of the narratives, audios, image, visual, and overall quality. But happy to discuss this further. But just to give you an idea of the basics of this particular module. And I also gathered some initial reflections from teachers as well. Just wanted to share with you guys. We're going to have a discussion later on. The first sort of theme or cluster, if you like, is this idea of creative problem solving. So, for example, students, are saying that AI helped them with parts of the story that they couldn't express well, and in the end, seemed to help them with the creative side of solving the problem. AI acted as a catalyst for new ways of thinking. Okay. The other cluster is the idea that I mentioned earlier, the iterative attunement side of engaging with GenAI. is that initially they found that it's really difficult, really tricky to work with the tool, but gradually they build up the capacity over time. So it does take time. And then the next cluster is about the critical engagement, whether they accept the output at face value, or do they have some sort of critical reflection. For example, in this case, collaboration with GenAI was not just about using the tool as an opportunity to reflect the interaction between technology, human, and society. So I just want to conclude today's presentation with a few points. Again, this is, I started preparing for this presentation, and then, these lead big companies released the OpenAI ChatGPT study mode in July. Claude released the learning mode in August, and then Gemini released the guided learning mode in August as well. So gradually, what the pattern I'm seeing here is that traditionally we're thinking about GenAI as a productivity tool. So it's about giving you answers as fast as they can, right? They usually use benchmarks on how fast the model would give you answer to a particular question. But the consecutive release of these learning modes really calls into the question of whether that's actually, for learning and teaching at least, is that a productivity, is it good, or is it something that we need to rethink? So what we can see from the release of these new learning modes is that the productivity curve is flattening. So it's not going like this, it's going like slightly slower when it comes to learning. I think it marks an effort to rehumanize GenAI through the three things I talked about today: the iterative attunement, creative dialogue, and building a reciprocal partnership. Because if you use the study mode, you will know that it's Socratic, right? So it takes time for you to get an answer from the AI rather than straight away. So it does go through several layers of negotiation and problem solving rather than having the answer straight away. This is in sharp contrast to the rapid development of GenAI tools themselves. And I think it calls more attention to contextualizing learning at a much slower pace. So if you compare productivity with a slower pace learning, maybe that's what we should be focusing on going forward. So I think this calls for a constant rebalancing of the idea of distributed agency as the entangled assemblages that are being challenged and reshaped in an AI-mediated world. That's me for my talk. Thank you very much, everyone.